ladies and gentlemen, Chris Rock!
The winter streets of Brooklyn were cold, silent, broken only by the echo of Chris's footsteps on concrete. Each step sounded like a ticking clock that refused to stop, a reminder that time never waits, even when the heart is breaking. After his father, Julius Rock, passed, comedy carried a shadow. Every joke he told, every stage he stood on, held a whisper of the man who taught him to stand tall, even when the world wanted to see him fall. Chris once said, "When my father died, part of me died too, but another part got louder. That louder part was the pain learning how to breathe." He learned to turn that ache into rhythm, to mold regret into resilience. Every show, every microphone was a letter home to a father who never saw the ending of the story he began. For anyone who has lost a father, that pain is familiar. The ache of words left unspoken, hands no longer held, pride arriving too late. And in every laugh that filled a room, Julius's ghost lived on, a love that could outlast death itself. Years later, another silence came. In 2006, Chris lost his half-brother, Charles Little Rock, to alcoholism. Charles was proud, private, and older, a man who carried his pain like a secret too heavy to share. To the world, he was invisible. But to Chris, he was family, blood, history. Charles had a quiet strength, a way of making Chris laugh without even trying. And yet, life has a cruel rhythm. The quiet ones often suffer the loudest battles. For years, Charles fought addiction, sometimes winning, more often losing. Chris would call, make jokes, try to pull him back. And then came the call, the one that begins with a silence too long to survive. Charles was gone. Chris never spoke publicly. There were no headlines, no interviews, just the private ache that lives deep in your bones. Fame teaches you how to smile, but it doesn't teach you how to grieve. He returned to the sets, filmed scenes, stood under lights brighter than ever. But inside, everything had dimmed. Loss whispered in every breath, in the spaces between laughs. Addiction doesn't just take life, it steals chances. One more conversation, one more hug, one more apology. The grief transformed Chris's comedy. Jokes slowed, pauses lengthened. Laughter still came, but it carried truth beneath it. His stand-up became confession, each show a quiet eulogy, disguised as humor. The world called him fearless. He called it honesty. Grief, when lived long enough, stops breaking you. It shapes you. Losing Charles reminded him of Julius. Two men, same bloodline, gone too soon, victims of exhaustion in different forms. Chris realized, unspoken pain becomes poison. "I've seen what happens when men don't talk about their pain," he said. So he made his speak for him. Then came another heartbreak. In 1990, Chris joined Saturday Night Live, a young, restless talent in a whirlwind of brilliance and chaos. Among the bad boys were Adam Sandler, Rob Schneider, David Spade, Chris Farley, and Rock himself. Chris and Farley were opposites in rhythm, but twins in soul. Farley roared with life on the outside while silently wrestling his own pain inside. Chris saw a familiar shadow, a man who could make the world forget their sorrow, but couldn't stop crying himself. They shared green rooms, car rides, long nights where laughter felt more like medicine than art. Yet fame fed a darker hunger, a pressure to stay loved, stay funny, stay alive. On December 18, 1997, that hunger claimed Farley. He was 33. Chris remembers the call as a punch that never stopped echoing. "He was the funniest man I ever knew," he whispered years later. And maybe the saddest. Laughter that once defined their youth now sounded like an elegy. Chris learned that the stage could save your body, but not always your soul. That sometimes the loudest performers are crying the hardest when the crowd has gone home. Another silence followed years later. In 2008, Bernie Mac, Chris's comedy mentor and brother, passed at 50 from pneumonia complications. Bernie wasn't just a colleague. He was a monument to pride and artistry in black comedy. Calm, grounded, wise. His laughter filled rooms without shouting. Chris said at the funeral, voice breaking, "Bernie didn't just make me laugh, he made me proud to be a black comedian." Losing him was like closing a chapter on brotherhood itself, but also a reminder. Those who teach you to live never truly leave. Through all this loss, Chris's comedy changed. Jokes slowed, silences stretched. Laughter became communion, a conversation with the ghosts of friends who shaped him. Farley's grin, Bernie's laugh. They lived between the punchlines. And yet, grief was not just about others. Life brought its most intimate trial: marriage. In New York, 1994, Chris met Malak Compton. Unlike his world of lights and cameras, she carried a calm, steady light. She laughed not at fame, but at humanity. Not at jokes, but at honesty. In her presence, Chris discovered silence, the kind that could save him. They married in 1996 quietly, without flashbulbs. Their home in Alpine, New Jersey became sanctuary. Mornings smelled of coffee and toast. Jazz trickled from the kitchen radio. Laughter spilling through hallways. Children arrived, Lola Simone in 2002, Zara Savannah in 2004. The man who built his empire on stage presence now learned to rock a tiny life to sleep, feed milk bottles, and hear every whispered giggle. Yet silence can be double-edged. Success, tours, and constant attention slowly built walls. Chris's voice, once a bridge, became an echo. An infidelity entered, not as scandal but as symptom. He admitted, raw and unguarded, "I wasn't a good husband. That's nobody's fault but mine." Therapy followed, not to save fame, but to save a soul. He confronted fear, avoidance, and the reflex to perform instead of connect. By the time he understood what love required, the marriage had grown tired. In December 2014, after nearly 19 years together, Chris and Malak separated. Divorce finalized in 2016. They shared custody of the daughters and lived close by. Fatherhood became his anchor, picking up children from school, attending recitals, quietly showing up. This was Chris's redemption. Lessons from love lost shaped the man he was becoming, one who understood presence mattered more than applause. Chris's comedy evolved alongside his life. Laughs deepened, pauses lengthened. Humor carried tenderness and truth, refined by decades of loss, love, and reflection. Love, he realized, doesn't end when marriage does. It transforms, moving from promise to responsibility. The girls, Lola and Zara, remained his greatest standing ovations. Their presence, their growth, became the measure of his success. Softer, more profound than any stage or spotlight. Today, at 60, Chris Rock embodies understanding, not just fame. From a Brooklyn kid flipping burgers to a global comedian, actor, writer, and producer, his journey reflects triumphs, stumbles, and reinvention. Homes in Alpine and Brooklyn anchor him in memory and meaning. Luxury cars, net worth, awards. They are echoes of decades turning truth into art. Real wealth, he insists, is peace. In 2024, his animated series Everybody Still Hates premiered, reimagining his childhood with humor, honesty, and heart. Film projects continue, personal and fearless, exploring redemption and truth. Offstage, he quietly gives back. Donations to education, women's empowerment, disaster relief, and style works remain largely private. His days are now simpler. Meditation, early walks, family calls, Quiet performances in small clubs, a nonverbal learning disorder diagnosis in 2020 brought honesty and humor. Turns out, I'm neurologically bad at people. Therapy continues as lifelong practice, a path toward humility. Lola and Zara, now adults, carved their own paths in Paris and Los Angeles, maintaining connection with their father through presence and love. Chris Rock's life reads like a heartbeat, triumph and loss, grief and grace. He has redefined comedy through compassion, moving beyond outrage to reflection. Success is no longer measured in applause, but in presence, in truth, and in the courage to carry light through silence. The stages will fade, crowds will move on, yet in a quiet house in New Jersey, two voices still call, "Dad!" And in that sound, laughter endures, soft, eternal, proof of a life lived honestly, bravely, and forgiven.